Sean Vincent Gillis was born on June 24, 1962, and is one of the many notorious serial killers in Baton Rouge, Louisiana during the late 90s and mid-2000s. Sean's father had walked out on him and his mother at a young age, leading to Sean being raised primarily by his biological mother, Yvonne, and his grandmother. And normally, I would probably say the dad is a POS for doing this, but in this case, the absence of his dad was probably better for Sean, oddly enough. Although I'm not sure if better is the right word to use here, as Sean still turned out to be a monster, but his dad was a terrible person who was frequently involved in a lot of sketchy activities. Sean's criminal history can be traced back to the 80s at the age of about 16 to 17, when Sean had been arrested for a variety of reasons, including DUI, possession of illegal substances, other traffic violations, and more. However, it wouldn't be until his 30s that Sean would give in to his carnal desires. And unfortunately, his desires didn't stop at just murder. It gets much worse. Later on, he shared that he had a lot of dark thoughts at a very young age. Sometimes, these thoughts even involved his family members. Neighbors and students who grew up near Sean said that he was basically a bully and just a menace to society, even at a young age. After graduating high school, Sean didn't know what to do next. He went out and got a part-time job to have some money to spend. At the same time, he enrolled himself in a community college, which didn't result in any career for Sean. The next decade or so of his life would gradually disappear, with Sean not accomplishing or pursuing anything. During that entire time, he lived at home with his mother, but one day his mom was contacted by people in Atlanta with a job proposal. Yvonne accepted. However, this job was in Atlanta, so she had to leave Sean alone. She regularly sent money back to Sean as well, since at this point, at the age of 30, Sean wasn't able to keep any of his jobs for very long. And one of the reasons that he constantly hopped around was because of his crippling addiction, which started around his teenage years. Pair this with a mentally unwell man that is prone to having violent thoughts, well, you're going to get an awful outcome. Fast forward to 1994, Sean Gillis met a woman named Terry Lemoyne, and the two didn't like each other at first. Terry had slapped Sean on their first date, which set off the waterworks, and for whatever reason, Terry told Sean they could go out on another date if he stopped crying. The two build a relationship where Terry gets a good idea of Sean's daily life. She was aware of Sean's obsession with stuff like but she did not know the dark thoughts in his head. These thoughts, which have been brewing for years, finally manifested in March of the same year. In Baton Rouge, there's this exclusive retirement home called St. James Place. Inside it lived a woman named Anne Bryan who was in her 80s. Sean saw Anne and decided that she would be his first victim. He planned to rape her. Sean had never met Anne before, so this was all a spur-of-the-moment type event. Sean sneaks into Anne's residence but can't subdue Anne quietly. She was alerted to Sean's presence and screamed for help. Sean, having never actually attempted this sort of thing before, panicked and took Anne's life. Everything was a blur, and he stabbed Anne over 50 times all over. Sean was able to flee the area, and no one suspected him of the crime at first. Around this time, Terry observed a change in the content that Sean indulged in. Suddenly, Sean started frequently visiting sites that offered much more graphic content. Terry, however, thought that as long as this was nothing more than a fantasy and he kept to himself, then it was no issue. For the next 5 years, Sean essentially went silent. Then in January 1999, Sean struck again. This victim was named Catherine Hall. Catherine was a sex worker who got into Sean's car after the promise of money. Sean had attempted to strangle Catherine, but she was able to slip out of his grasp. But when she attempted to open the door and run off, Sean reached for his knife and attacked Catherine. After he was sure that Catherine was dead, Sean proceeded to assault the body. He also mutilated Catherine afterward before leaving her at a construction site next to a dead-end sign. The following incident occurred in May of 1999. One day, Sean was out in Baton Rouge and saw a woman jogging. Sean was instantly enamored by her and planned out his next attack. This woman was named Hardy Schmidt, but each time Sean was ready to attack, Hardy would either be with someone or the area just wouldn't be safe enough for him to commit a crime. So he spent several weeks just shadowing Hardy, waiting for an opening. This opening arrived on May 30th at about 5:30 a.m. Hardy was was yet again out for a jog and Sean just rammed into her with his car. This sent her flying, and Sean quickly got out and wrapped this thick plastic wrap around her head before shoving her into his car. Because of the car hitting her, Hardy had sort of become stunned, unable to comprehend what was happening to her. Sean took the 52-year-old to a secluded park where he and murdered her. Sean didn't immediately dispose of the remains, but instead waited 2 days before abandoning Hardy. Neither Hardy nor Catherine's murders were tied to Anne Bryan, but all of the crime scenes had traces of DNA evidence. The problem was that investigators did not have Sean's DNA in their official records, so they weren't able to match it up to him. Then in November of the same year, Sean had taken another life. This one was 26-year-old Joyce Williams, who had been strangled. The murders continued into the year 2000, starting with 52-year-old Lillian Robinson. Sean had also assaulted Lillian's body after death, just like with Catherine Hall. Then another victim named Marilyn Nevels, aged 38, had also been killed in October of 2000. It was later revealed during an interrogation that is actually available on YouTube that Sean liked to consume parts of his victims. I listened to portions of the interrogations and it's just really chilling listening to this man describe events such as his victims after their deaths. He even bathed with a few of them. And if you have watched, I believe, the most recent Police Sketches video, you'll remember I mentioned a man named Derek Todd Lee. He was also one of the more notorious serial killers at the time in Baton Rouge. But Derek Lee and Sean Gillis were not the only killers at the time. They're just two of the more well-known killers. During the 90s and 2000s, Baton Rouge was plagued with crime. And I believe someone commented under that other video saying that even today, that city still has a lot of crime going on. So with that in mind, investigators had their hands full. There was so much crime happening that it was tough to sort out who killed whom. In fact, investigators thought that Derek was responsible for Sean's murders as well. And funny enough, when Sean was finally apprehended and investigators went through his computer, they found a folder under the name Derek Todd Lee. After Derek was arrested, Sean had been researching all that he had done and kept it all in that folder. Then there were also other photos that he had taken of himself, likely right after he committed some of his crimes. After the death of Marilyn Nevels, Sean had yet again gone on a sort of break. This time it lasted until October of 2003, when Sean had taken the life of 45-year-old Johnny Mae Williams, which was then followed by the death of 43-year-old Donna Bennett Johnston in February of 2004. And both of these women were also subjected to the same cruel post-mortem routines that I mentioned throughout this segment. But it is with the discovery of Donna's remains that authorities would finally start connecting some of these cases. Sean had ditched Donna in this muddy drainage area near Louisiana State University. After recovering the remains, investigators found some tire tracks nearby. Photos were taken of the tracks and experts were brought in to check them out in person. It was determined that a particularly uncommon Goodyear tire, which was only produced for a short window, had left these tracks. This then resulted in a list of transactions that involved this set of tires. Amongst the names associated with those transactions was Sean Gillis. One by one, authorities visited each of the people on the list and got their DNA to test against the DNA associated with their unsolved cases, and inevitably the DNA was matched to Sean. A subsequent search warrant was issued and the authorities were able to sweep through the home where Sean and his girlfriend Terry were living. And during the search, investigators found a bunch of photographs of Sean's victims. Hidden away in various corners of the residence were also parts of the victims. Sean had kept these body parts sort of as trophies or mementos to take him back to those moments so that he could replay them in his head. Surprisingly, almost immediately, Sean admitted to the horrible crimes he had committed. During one of his interrogations, he was quoted saying, "I'm sorry I hurt people, but I would do it again. You let me out on the street. I'll find somebody before sundown. If anything in my useless life comes out, help the little girls today not to be the premature corpses of tomorrow." Sean's mother attempted to defend him by saying that he was a kind man who didn't cause anybody any trouble. But as we all know, this is just not the case. In April of 2004, he received several life sentences. Some wanted to pursue the death penalty, however, that didn't end up happening. Currently, Sean is in the Louisiana State Penitentiary. The woman you are currently seeing on screen was named Nirupama Prajapati. Nirupama went out to visit a river located in Kanakunda in western India. It was early January 2021 when she and her friends made the trip out to the Grand Canyon of Odisha. That selfie you saw was taken just moments before Nirupama's life ended. Other tourists were also in the area, and one of them recorded the moment when a man slipped on the rocks and knocked Nirupama into the river. The water was much too strong for Nirupama to get her footing and stand up, and there wasn't much the other tourists could do to help her either. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. By the time the others realized what was happening, the current had carried Nirupama out of reach. Quickly, officials were called and a search team was formed to find Nirupama. And after nearly an entire day of searching, Nirupama was finally located. The stream had carried her about a quarter of a mile from where she had fallen. Her body had snagged onto a large rock. When the incident made its rounds on the internet, the public was also informed that this was not the first time someone had died trying to secure selfies near the water. This next entry will take us over to Denmark, specifically Copenhagen, in the year 2017. Peter Madsen is the name of an entrepreneur turned murderer. He was born on January 12th, 1971. Peter's mother, Annie, was about 30 years younger than her husband, Carl, and had a few other children from past relationships. It was rumored that Carl did not particularly like his stepchildren and at times even abused them. Eventually, Carl's relationship with Annie turned sour and the two split, with Annie taking the kids. Peter was about 6 years old when this occurred. However, several years down the line, Peter was able to get back in touch with his father, and the two bonded over their shared interest in rockets. Now, this wasn't just some normal interest that faded with age. No, Peter was genuinely fascinated with technology, so he would go to various camps and special classes over the years and build his first rocket in March of 1986. Or rather, not his first rocket, but the first rocket of significant size. Then, just 3 years after that event, Peter's father passed away. In the early to mid-2000s, Peter had built 3 submarines: the UC-1 Freya, UC-2 Kraka, and the UC-3 Nautilus, the latter of which was launched in May of 2008. That same year, Peter co-founded a space program called Copenhagen Suborbitals before leaving it behind in 2014. That same year, he created a new group called Rocket Madsen Space Lab. That's pretty much the gist of Peter's backstory. He's a pretty brilliant man. Now, I want to introduce a woman named Kim Wall. She was a 30-year-old Swedish freelance journalist born on March 23rd, 1987 in Trelleborg, Sweden. Her mother was also a journalist and her father was a photographer, which played a role in Kim wanting to pursue journalism. Kim traveled the world, writing articles and stories about anything that interested her. And it just so happened that she was interested in Peter's work, but every attempt she made to get in touch with Peter for an interview failed. That was until she received a message. It was August 10th, 2017, when Kim visited Copenhagen to hang out with some friends. A farewell party had been planned, and during it, Kim received a text message from Peter Madsen himself. Kim was ecstatic and thought to herself that she had finally secured an interview. So she opened up the text and it was an invitation from Peter to join him on his submarine, the UC-3 Nautilus. Peter told Kim that he had about 2 hours to spare for whatever she wanted to ask. Kim let her boyfriend Ole Stab know that she was going to head out with Peter to finally do that interview she'd been trying to secure. When asked how long she'd be gone for, Kim said that she'd be back in no more than a few hours. The photos you see on screen are the last ones taken of her before she and Peter set out in the Nautilus. After some time had passed, Ole Stab had received a text message from Kim. It said, "I'm alive by the way, now we're going to go down. I love you." He brought coffee and cookies. Some more time went by and Ole sent a text to check in on Kim, but she never responded. Before he knew it, it was 10:30 and a couple of hours had passed since Kim had left with Peter. So Ole was expecting the pair to return soon. But after visiting the pier where the Nautilus had left, there was no sign of them. Ole waited a bit longer and at this point, he wasn't all that concerned. He thought that the interview was simply going very well, and Kim wanted to keep asking questions, but then more hours passed. At about 2 a.m., Ole finally called authorities. The Coast Guard was also contacted and tried to communicate with Peter's submarine, but they also received no response. Everyone's first thought was that the submarine had some sort of accident underwater, so several search parties were sent out to search for it. The very next morning, around 10:30 a.m., Peter and his submarine were spotted. However, the submarine was actually sinking. Kim was nowhere to be seen. When Peter was asked if everything was okay, he said yeah. Then he was asked where Kim was. Peter responded by saying he had dropped her off along the bay before the sub had sunk. Investigators didn't buy this. But surprisingly, that same day, they actually charged Peter with manslaughter. They believed that Peter had killed Kim Wall. Investigators swept through the area where Peter claimed to have left Kim, but they couldn't find any sign of the woman. They also visited several of the local businesses there to see if they had seen Kim or if their cameras had picked her up. And as you probably expected, none of the employees saw her and the cameras didn't see Kim either. And this is where things get very interesting. When Peter was brought into court, he changed his story. Instead of leaving her on the bay, Peter said that Kim had actually died. According to him, shortly after the two had set out, Kim had banged her head against the hatch, which killed her. Peter was in a panic and didn't know what he should do, so he roamed the waters aimlessly before tossing Kim overboard. Meanwhile, the Nautilus was being investigated by officials who stated that they believed it was with a high likelihood that the sub was purposely sabotaged. However, they couldn't find Kim herself inside of the sub, but her blood was inside of it, and there was a lot of blood. Then on August 21st, a torso was discovered on the shore not too far from where the Nautilus used to be docked. The torso was discovered by a man riding his bike, and it was later confirmed to belong to Kim. And here's the thing, there were numerous knife wounds on Kim's body, 15 to be exact, and a bunch of those wounds were left around Kim's reproductive organs. Then, in October of the same year, the rest of Kim's remains were discovered one by one at the bottom of Koje Bay. They were all bagged up with heavy metal pieces inside to weigh them down. Even the knife that Peter used was found. Investigators stated that they believed Peter restrained Kim when they went underwater before ultimately taking her life. After this discovery was made public, Peter finally admitted to taking Kim's life. But what exactly caused this seemingly random attack from Peter? Peter Madsen appeared to be an entirely ordinary individual enjoying a successful career in a field he was genuinely passionate about. It turned out that Peter had a much darker side. Authorities searched Peter's residence, and on his computer, they found dozens of snuff videos. When this discovery was mentioned during interviews with Peter's peers, they revealed that Peter often took part in parties and had a fetish involving sadism. In March 2018, Peter's trial began, and it lasted until late April of the same year. Peter pleaded not guilty. Peter yet again switched up the story. This time around, Peter claimed that Kim Wall had died as a result of carbon monoxide poisoning. He was ultimately charged with Kim's death along with a flurry of other crimes and received a life sentence. But this story doesn't end here. His stay in prison turned out to be quite eventful. He even got himself a girlfriend. It was some random female guard. So in October 2020, Peter was actually able to escape from prison, but he was later caught. He was found with a sort of a makeshift firearm and what looked like explosives strapped to him. These explosives later turned out to just be fakes, however.